Here are 4 goosebump-inducing stories for grown-up kids who like to scare themselves before going to sleep. My soothing voice, the sound of the rain, and the assurance of being safe in bed will guarantee you a deep sleep. Now turn off the lights, pull up the blanket, and enjoy the goosebumps. The Metal Man of Courtney, Nevada. I'm a cop in Nevada for a tiny town of less than 1,000. Courtney, Nevada doesn't have an actual police force. The mayor is usually whoever is the soberest at election time, and it's made up of retirees and people trying not to be noticed. It lies between Austin and Eureka, and the whole town is managed by a single officer, me. I live in Eureka, but 3 months out of the year I stay in the dingy little Palmer Inn and operate the emergency phone system. It's routed to my cell phone, and when I'm not out on a call I can be found in my room watching TV. The Palmer actually gets really satellite TV. You probably think this sounds like the Post from hell, but the crime rate in Courtney is next to nothing. I've been doing this on and off for about 3 years, and I think I've only had to reach for my gun twice in that time. We do 3 months on and then swap with another officer for 3 months, but sometimes I'll just offer to do 6 months in a row. Courtney is as peaceful as a town full of oldsters and whatever else can be. After tonight, however, I'm not sure I can look at the place the same again. I'm trying to write up the paperwork now, but I'm just not sure what to say. There's no way they'll believe the truth, but I swear it happened. I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'm hoping that if I write it out here, then it might be easier to explain to my supervisors. I was sitting out on the town line with my radar gun at about 10:30 at night when the quiet town suddenly got less quiet. So, the only thing to really do in Courtney to justify my being there is to catch speeders on Highway 50. The speed zone changes from 65 to about 35 in the course of a mile, and the number of drivers that seem to think they can just blow through the little town doing 60 is too damn high. I had a rig of my own invention that held my speed gun up to the window and a good hiding place behind an old billboard, leaving me basically unseen and my hands free to watch whatever on my phone. I had foregone the adventures of Luffy and the crew in favor of a new horror podcast, and I was just getting comfy when something hit the ground hard enough to rock my cruiser on its frame. My phone fell into the floorboard about a second before the speed gun came down to hit me in the head, and I came out of the car rubbing my scalp and cursing like a sailor. I got out and looked across the street, seeing heat shimmers as something cooled in the desert nearby. The oldsters who lived here had told me that meteors were sometimes seen falling out in the desert, but this one had damn near taken my cover out. I had never seen a meteor up close, not unless you counted the ones at the museum my school had drugged the class to when I was a kid, and I was interested in getting a good look. It was kind of cool to see something that had been cruising through space up until a few minutes ago, and I made my way across the road and toward the crater. I was still in the road when, to my surprise, I heard the sound of metal grating against itself. I could see the top of something dark as it rose above the lip of the crater, and the top was still glowing from its entry through the atmosphere. The hole wasn't terribly deep, but this would have still been taller than me by a foot. It would have been a shame if one of those aforementioned speeders had come blowing through while not paying attention, because I would have been roadkill. I was about 60 feet from it, but it looked like one of those old NASA spacesuits, except made of silver. When it moved, it was the herky-jerky kind of steps that a sci-fi robot might make in an old 50s movie. It slipped in the sand a little, but managed to find its footing as it made its slow way out of the crater. If it had noticed me, it gave no sign, and when it got to the top of the hole it turned and started making its way for town. I hadn't noticed before it got on solid ground, probably because the sand was running back to quench it, but when it stepped, its footsteps left little fires behind. It made it easy to follow, and as I went back to the cruiser to get my radio, I realized I had no one to call right about the time I keyed up the mic. I was here by myself. I was the law in Courtney, and it was up to me to do something about this. I dropped the handset and climbed in instead, keying the engine as I pulled out and followed the strange creature that had crashed randomly on the outskirts of the little burg. It wasn't hard to follow him. His feet left little fires behind him, and his pace was slow as he went through the desert and closer to town. Watching him go, I wasn't really sure what to do with him if I did try to stop him. Could he be stopped with anything in my car? I had a shotgun, my sidearm, and a couple of those flashbangs we used to control large groups. None of that seemed like it would do much against this metal man who was slowly making his way through the desert. Watching him move was like watching a stop-motion short. He was some kind of strange automaton, a metal man whose skin was still slightly red from his fall from space. Instead of pulsing and burning, as his steps had, he seemed to shimmer like a heat reflection. He didn't seem lost, his pilgrimage definitely going in a certain direction, and as the lights of the quick fill broke the darkness with their phosphorescent intrusion, I began to get a little nervous. The quick fill was a 24/7 gas station that boasted 12 gas pumps and a huge underground holding tank. God only knew what would happen if this thing set a fire that went down to the reserve tank. I whipped into the parking lot, popping the trunk and grabbing for my shotgun. It had buckshot in it, a higher caliber than the 9mm slug in my Glock, and when I hefted it, it felt like I had 4 shells ready and waiting. There was a box of 12 in the trunk, and I put them in my jacket pocket before chambering around and taking the safety off. I didn't know what this thing was capable of, but I knew I couldn't let it menace my town. "You, all right, Sheriff?" came a shaky voice from the door to the quick fill, and it startled me enough to almost make me drop my shotgun. Clyde Haggerty, the 19-year-old kid who ran the register at the quick fill after 10:30, looked pretty scared. He had probably watched me come screeching in, pop the trunk, and go digging for my shotgun, all the while wondering what the hell was going on. In his mind, it was probably robbers or dopers, but he had no clue what was coming out of the desert for him. I didn't want him to see if this thing suddenly vaporized me with a death ray or something, and when I turned toward him, he jumped back a little as the barrel of the shotgun flagged him. "Go get somewhere safe, Clyde. Something is heading your way, and I don't want you to get mixed up with it." Clyde nodded, and I heard the door click as he went back inside and, hopefully, hid in the cooler or something. I turned back to find the creature lumbering closer, its distance now about 50 feet from me. The shotgun wouldn't do much at that range, but that would give me enough time to follow protocol and give it a warning before opening fire. "Stop! I'm an officer of the Eureka Police Department, and I am ordering you to halt and state your intent." The creature didn't even pause. It just kept its course as it made for the gas station. "Stop. This is your final order to stop, or I will open fire." It was well within range now, the fires burning behind it making it hard to miss, and when I squeezed the trigger, the gun bucked as the shot slammed into him. The metal man never slowed in his pursuit, and as I loaded another round, it was now about 20 feet from me. "Stop!" I yelled again, squeezing the trigger and pumping a new shell into the barrel as the old one thundered forth. A third shot let fly a second later, but if the creature was even registering them, it didn't show it. It kept coming as I fed new shells into the gun, and as I slid the fourth into the receiver, I felt a sudden and excruciating heat. It was like standing too close to a bonfire, and as I stumbled away from the thing, I looked up to find that it was within about 10 feet of me. It appeared that it was still very hot, and its skin radiated an intense heat that the sand had done nothing to quench it. I yelped again as my fingers blistered, and I realized the gun was soaking up as much heat as I was. I tossed it down, and not a moment too soon either. The bullets in the weapon began to erupt, sending the shotgun flying apart, and I turned away and covered my face just in time. I caught some shrapnel in my arms and a little in my back, but I was spared the worst of it. As it lumbered past, I tossed the shells out too, lobbing them as far as I could manage before they went off. Even so, I was reminded of a time as a kid when I had to reach for something underneath the radiator while it was on. Even though I had been careful not to touch it with my face or hands, I could still feel the heat coming off of it as I stretched for the toy I had lost under there. It was like that now, except this thing was a walking radiator. It went right past me and towards the gas station, its course unerring. As it came around the side, I remembered another weapon at my disposal and ran back to the trunk of the cruiser. I had a fire extinguisher in there, one of the big ones that I'd needed to put out a trash fire once, and as the creature came around to the front of the store, I pulled the pin and sprayed it with a stream of foam. It coated the thing, hissing as it hit its superheated skin and sliding off like cheese on those copper pans they're always trying to sell on TV. It was impossible to tell if it was doing anything, but as I played it out, I heard a hellish sound coming from the front of the store. The thing had reached out and melted the glass on the double doors, walking through the hole as it went right into the quick fill. There wasn't much I could do besides follow him. I didn't know where Clyde was, but I hoped he was safe. The store looked empty as I followed at a relatively safe distance, and the front counter was vacant. It appeared that Clyde had taken me seriously, and as the creature stumbled into the little shop, I found myself spraying at fires left in his passing. He went by the chips, the candy, the snack cakes, all of them curling a little as the heat kissed them. He was making his slow way towards the drink cooler, and he seemed to be looking for something in particular. As he stood looking in, the floor bowed and sagged beneath his otherworldly warmth, and I was worried that he would go right through the floor at this rate. When he reached out, slowly and deliberately, his hand melted its way into the cooler, and the puff of angry cold air that came out was almost comical. It hissed against the creature's skin as it reached in for something, and when it came out with a bottle of Dr. Pepper, the container was already starting to warp. It tilted it towards its head, spilling the dark liquid all over itself, before reaching for another one. By the third bottle, they had stopped crumpling quite so quickly, and by the seventh, it was clear that it was tossing the liquid into whatever served it for a mouth. It ran through a whole row of them before starting on the Diet Dr. Peppers, and as it finished that row too, I noticed its skin was less translucent than before. Some of the heat shimmer had left it, and some of the blazing warmth had dissipated. It was cooling down, and as it dropped the last mostly intact bottle to the ground, it released a very human sigh of relief. Then it fell to pieces on the floor of the quick fill, its body reduced to scrap. And that was the end of my encounter. I'm still not sure what to make of it all. The creature landed on Earth, tromped through the desert, destroyed my shotgun, wrecked up the front of the quick fill, and then drank soda until he turned into scrap metal, Dr. Pepper, to be exact, but who's counting? I don't know if my supervisors will accept this or not, but I do have something they can use as proof besides the crater on the outskirts of town. Every step that he took through the desert left behind a perfect little footprint of pure glass, and the glass had a tread in it. I've saved a few of them, just in case, and Clyde has provided a witness statement as well. Apparently, he was hiding in the cooler when the creature came in and saw it drink all that Dr. Pepper before collapsing. Hopefully, that will be enough to convince my supervisors I'm not crazy, but I hope to never have another night like that one again. Something else comes to mind too, and it makes me hesitant to go to the fridge for my favorite midnight drink of choice. If my fire extinguisher did little more than kick up steam, what's in Dr. Pepper that quenched his heat so well? It's time for our second story. It is called, I found the original 2001 cut of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. After watching it, I wish I hadn't. Enjoy the goosebumps. About a year and a half ago, me and a group of my friends decided to go to an auction house for the first time. We had all just graduated high school and wanted to try something new. so I suggested trying to buy some rare stuff at an auction. Odd choice, I know, but I also am the type to collect niche things and try to find rare stuff. I secretly hoped to find something like the first Star Wars VHS or something, even though I knew that wouldn't happen, but I can't say that I didn't find something rare. The auction started off pretty boring, just a bunch of old furniture, knickknacks, jewelry, mostly old people's stuff. Just as I was about to lose hope on finding anything I found interesting, however, the man pulled out an old, very odd-looking VHS tape. Now my friends obviously aren't into VHS tapes and didn't really care too much for it, but I tend to collect those sorts of things, so I was all in, especially if it was something I didn't already have. The auctioneer began describing what the tape was, stating it was the 2001 cut of the 2002 Sam Raimi Spider-Man film that was smuggled out of Sony HQ by one of the workers. Immediately upon hearing this, I was already ready to bid top dollar. I mean, come on, seeing an unseen cut of one of my favorite movies? How could I pass up on that? Admittedly, the choice may not have been my smartest, but I immediately bid on it, starting at the $20 mark. Hey, I figured no matter what, it'll at least have those deleted scenes from the trailer in it, and at best, I might even get to see something new. Unsurprisingly, very few people there cared enough to bid on the tape, probably because it's such a niche collector's thing, and it was mostly old people there who didn't even see the released cut. There were a few, but after I reached $50, they didn't see it as worth it anymore. So, I won the tape. My friends obviously scolded me on the way home about wasting my money on something that probably isn't all that different and that I'll probably never watch, but I was a massive Tobey Spider-Man fan, and I didn't care that I had just spent half of that week's paycheck on it. I was just happy to have a rare, one-of-a-kind Spider-Man thing no one else had, and stared at the packaging, reveling in the glory of it. This tape had the Twin Towers Spidey poster on the cover, with the Spider-Man lettering strewn across the top. The tape's covering looked battered a bit, but not damaged enough to worry me about the tape's integrity. On the way home, my best friend Max continued mocking me for my purchase and bet me the price I paid for the tape that if we take it out of its package and watch it, it will be some sort of bootleg or the same movie. Now, of course, my overconfident ass said it was a deal and offered for him to stay the night at my place and watch it with me. He agreed, and we shook on it. As soon as we got back to my place and sat on the couch, I knew it was my time to shine. I quickly, and without hesitation, pulled the VHS tape out of its sleeve and stared at it. The tape itself seemed slightly worn and in mediocre condition, but it didn't have much more than the normal wear and tear VHS tapes that were played repetitively normally got. On the front was a Sony with the text "Property of Sony Pictures, do not distribute" printed directly below it. My friend, still convinced it was some sort of cheap fake, told me to stop stalling and get on with putting the tape in, to which I jokingly cussed him out as I placed the tape in the player to put him to shame. Sure enough, the tape started, no trailers, but instead a warning screen warning. The material you are viewing is test material from Sony Pictures and is not meant to be distributed. Any participants to this viewing who do distribute this tape will be subject to termination. The screen flashed to the next screen, filled with more text. The following is footage for Sony executives to pre-screen the unfinished cut of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Seeing this, I looked over at my still unimpressed friend, now completely convinced that I had struck gold. The rest of the tape played like normal for the most part, mostly the same film we know and love, just with unfinished VFX, extended shots, and yes, it did have that iconic deleted Twin Towers scene I was looking for. My friend, of course, still brushed it off, saying any chump with a laptop could edit this together. This is nothing, I haven't seen in deleted scenes of this, to which I promptly told him to shut up and keep watching. After that Twin Towers scene, the movie continued with only a few minor changes. I honestly couldn't tell you most of the changes in the film unless I put the versions side by side. My guess is it was just mostly different takes of scenes, alternate angles, things of that nature. Nothing too different, much like what led up to the Twin Towers scene. But the real, big change came at the end of the movie. The final scene began normal, Green Goblin calling Peter at the hospital, telling him to meet him somewhere where he has MJ, the classic bridge scene. Except this time, the scene took place on a slightly taller bridge. I found this slightly odd at first. There were tons of other alternate shots like this in the film, so maybe it's just another one of those. That was until Norman dropped the car with the people and MJ. The cart and MJ dropped, with that same zoom-in shot on Peter's mask as he tried to decide who to save, but this time he jumped after the cart instead and then MJ. While I found it odd that it had played this way, I didn't think much of it as he still managed to save both, or so it seemed. Where it really changed was when the Goblin used his glider to try and knock Spider-Man down. While in the original cut MJ fell just a little bit, managing to catch herself on the side of the cart, in this version, she followed the same path, but smacked her head on the corner, smashing into the boat that was floating underneath to save them. MJ's body hit the boat hard, falling into a pile of whatever it was the boat was carrying. Peter immediately set the cart down and proceeded to jump down to the boat to check on her, shouting MJ. As he dropped down, my heart sank as the realization of what had just happened set in. Was the original plan to kill off MJ? I thought to myself. I looked over to my friend, and he was in complete shock at this point, jaw dropping to the floor. I can't say much. I was in shock too. I had expected changes, but not this much of a change. Peter zipped down as stated before and had landed next to MJ. He picked up her body, holding it in his arms, and tried to revive her any way he could. He tried chest compressions, he tried everything, but she stayed limp. At this moment, Peter let out the loudest and most pained scream I had ever heard. A scream that could only be yelled out by a man who had lost everything within the course of a week. The sobbing was loud and audible after New Yorkers from the cart trying their best to console Pete, but to no avail. He was pissed off, and me and my friend knew we were about to see a Spider-Man we had never seen before. Instead of Norman forcing Peter into a fight against his will, the scene was flipped around, Peter webbing up to the Goblin's glider and smashing him in the face hard enough to crack his mask. It was clear now, Peter was not pulling his punches this time. Just as in the original cut, Peter ripped out parts of the glider and made it slam down into the piles of rubble nearby, but this time, Peter got up immediately and started beating the shit out of Norman, cracking the mask more and more with each punch, his knuckles beginning to get bloodied, Norman maniacally laughing through the first half, until Peter managed to finally break the mask in half. "You took MJ from me," Peter screamed, clearly done holding back. Just like in the film, Norman takes this opportunity to try and connect with Peter's humanity, revealing his identity, but instead of calming Peter down, his face changes to that of anger. Goblin took the opportunity to slow him down using a goblin bomb, hoping to kill him with it, but Peter shook it off like it was nothing, storming towards Norman and throwing him through a concrete wall. "You were everything I wanted to be," Peter screamed, a scientific genius. "I thought you cared about people," his face drenched in angry tears. "Peter," cried Norman, "please. What would Harry do without me?" Peter snapped at this moment. "You killed MJ, and you almost killed my Aunt May. No one else dies today." At this moment, Peter grabs the Goblin's fallen glider and slowly walks over to Norman, getting closer and closer, staring directly into Norman's eyes. He lifted up the glider and slammed it down hard into Norman's head, killing him instantly. Me and my friend both had to double-check with each other to make sure we saw the same thing. My friend even cleaned off his glasses quickly to make sure the image wasn't just blurry for him and he had interpreted the blurs the wrong way. But no! We had seen exactly what we thought. Peter had just murdered Norman. The last act continued with Harry finding Norman's body, and this time I guess rightfully blaming Spider-Man for his father's death. Meanwhile, Aunt May slowly recovered from the attacks as Peter went to visit MJ and his Uncle Ben's grave, giving a speech very similar to that of the one he gives in the final cut, only without the inclusion of MJ. The reaction me and my friend had was nothing short of complete shock. I really couldn't believe what I had just seen. I was shocked this had even made it to the executive office, and I could immediately see why Sony chose not to endorse this cut. This version of the ending was brutal. Don't get me wrong, it was still a fun watch. After all, I love these films, and I was glad to see the unreleased version, but if this had been the cut to release in 2002, there would have been riots. Needless to say, I got my $50 back, but me and Max both agreed to never ever speak of this cut again, with the exception of right now, I guess. Now is the time for our third story. I hope you're already sleeping like a baby, but in case you're too curious to close your eyes, here it is. The Pigman's Woods. Deep in the heart of the New Hampshire wilderness, where the dark trees stood tall and the silence seemed never-ending, Joshua and his son Tanner set out on their annual hunting trip. A tradition passed down through generations, this expedition was their sacred bond, a way for Joshua to teach Tanner the ways of the wild, just as his own father had once done long ago. The early morning mist clung to the forest floor as they ventured further into the remote woods. Their rifles slung over their shoulders, they stepped cautiously through the dew-soaked underbrush, the air thick with anticipation. For hours, everything appeared as it should: deer tracks, the distant chirping of birds, and the occasional rustling of unseen creatures. It was a peaceful and familiar rhythm for the father-son duo, until something sinister whispered its way into their lives. Their first chilling encounter with the beast known only as the Pigman began subtly. Deep within the dense foliage, they heard eerie grunts echoing through the trees and smelled a putrid stench disguised within the earthy scent of the forest. At first, they dismissed it as the desperate cries of a wild boar, a misunderstood creature dwelling in the shadows of the woods. But when they stumbled upon the telltale signs of the Pigman's presence, they realized they were entangled in something far more sinister than they could have ever imagined. It started innocuously, a trail of blood-soaked leaves leading them to a mutilated deer carcass, its insides ripped asunder. The ever-growing sense of dread tightened its grip on Joshua and Tanner's hearts as they continued their trek. Soon, they stumbled upon more macabre displays, disemboweled animals hanging from tree branches, their eyes void of life, and the marks left behind by menacing tusks. Each grisly scene painted a gruesome portrait of the Pigman's insatiable thirst for blood. Night fell, casting an ebony shroud over the forest, extinguishing any hope of escape. The duo huddled together, their weary minds plagued by the haunting howls that pierced through the darkness surrounding them. Fear gnawed at their souls, its tendrils winding tighter with each passing moment. Every rustling leaf, every crack of a twig sent shivers down their spines, for they knew the Pigman roamed these woods, silently waiting to claim his next victim. Unable to sleep, Joshua and Tanner embraced their rifles, their only companions in this twisted game of survival. Their eyes strained into the impenetrable blackness where the Pigman lurked. But as dawn painted the sky with shades of pink, they found something more horrifying than anything they had encountered before. Strewn across the forest floor were not just the remains of animals, but human limbs, skin peeled back in bloody ribbons, and a half-eaten face that bore an uncanny resemblance to Joshua's childhood friend who was killed 6 months prior in an alleged bear mauling. As the horrifying realization hit them, the forest seemed to convulse with evil laughter. The hunting trip had transformed into a desperate battle for survival, where every step came with the weight of uncertainty. With the Pigman closing in, Joshua had to muster every ounce of bravery in order to protect his son, stepping into the heart of darkness to reclaim their lives from the clutches of this malevolent creature. In the depths of the forest, father and son faced a terror that defied reason, a creature driven by a hunger they could never comprehend. As the pigmen closed in, the forest became their purgatory, an unforgiving battleground where their every move was tainted by the invisible whispers of death. With the remote possibility of escape slipping away, Joshua and Tanner were left with the harrowing question burning in their minds: were they the hunters or the hunted in this macabre dance with the pigman? With their hearts pounding and their minds sharpened by fear, Joshua and Tanner found themselves faced with a harrowing decision to either surrender to the overwhelming terror or rise up and fight for their lives. They refused to become victims in this grisly hunt orchestrated by the pigman. Survival instincts kicked in, driving them deeper into the forest. They devised cunning traps and contraptions, utilizing their knowledge of the terrain to set a stage of deception. Joshua and Tanner knew that to outsmart the pigman, they had to understand its patterns, its weaknesses. Night after night, they lay in wait, sleeping with one eye open, their senses finely tuned to the faintest rustle of leaves. The forest became their ally, whispering its secrets to them. They learned to anticipate the pigman's movements, exploiting its hunger for fresh kills. As days bled into nights, their understanding of the creature deepened, turning the tables on their tormentor. The duo hatched a plan, a desperate gambit to lure the pigman into a trap of their own making. They carved trails through the dense undergrowth, leading the creature into a maze-like corridor of cunningly concealed pits and snares. Their ambush was a calculated risk, one chance to gain the upper hand against a foe they barely comprehended. The moon hung high above their battleground as the pigman, drawn to the scent of violence and death, approached their carefully crafted trap. Joshua and Tanner held their breath, adrenalized anticipation coursing through their veins. The moment had come to face the monster that had haunted their every step. As the pigman stepped unwittingly into a concealed pit, a cacophony of triumphant roars echoed through the forest. Joshua and Tanner pounced on the opportunity, their hands trembling as they unleashed a barrage of bullets, piercing the night with bursts of thunderous echoes. The creature's grunts of pain mingled with their cries of liberation, fueling their relentless assault. Only when their rifles ran empty did they retreat, their hearts still racing, not daring to believe they had triumphed. The pigman, wounded and enraged, crawled out of the pit, its malevolent eyes fixed upon Joshua and Tanner. But even as fear threatened to overwhelm them, a surge of resilience pushed them forward. Armed with hunting knives and the spirit of survival, father and son fought the final battle against their relentless pursuer. Blood and sweat mingled with the forest floor as they danced with the pigman, dodging its vicious tusks while thrusting their blades into its hide. With each strike, they drew upon their deepest reserves of courage, refusing to relinquish their hold on life. Finally, in a climactic struggle, Joshua plunged his blade deep into the pigman's heart. The creature let out a guttural shriek, its once haunting eyes fading into blankness. The forest fell silent, as though holding its breath, as the terror that haunted those woods was vanquished. With trembling hands, Joshua and Tanner clung to each other, their bodies battered and their souls forever marked by the horrors they had endured. But in that moment of shared victory, they knew that they had come out of the abyss, forever changed, but stronger for it. As they emerged from the dark forest, Joshua and Tanner vowed to never speak of their encounter with the pigman. The everlasting memory of that hunting trip would forever haunt their dreams, serving as a reminder of the thin line between life and death. With newfound wisdom etched into their souls, they returned home and to their lives, cherishing every moment and forever bound by the unbreakable bond forged amidst unspeakable terror. Still not sleeping? Good, for you can listen to our fourth and final terrifying story called My Granddad Fought a Demon. This is an encounter of my late granddad Percy. My late granddad never told me this story in person, but my uncle, My granddad's firstborn son narrated this experience because apparently my uncle's life was at stake. My granddad used to work in the railway department, and as a privilege he was given accommodation in the department married quarters for the whole family for a duration of 5 years. The experience that I am about to note down occurred during this stay of the family at the departmental married quarters in the 1960s. My granddad was a really fit sportsman who used to play rugby and then transitioned into bodybuilding and martial arts. Granddad Percy was in his 40s and my uncle was about 6 or 7 years of age, and he was the only child in the family at the time. Being a sportsman and a martial artist, it obviously implies that my granddad was a man full of confidence, had a very outspoken personality, and was relatively fearless. Grandmother, of course, was the calm and quiet housewife who managed the household and kept things smooth, and was the typical housewife of the 60s, but with strong willpower and love for the family. Things had gone past smooth, and a few months had passed by while the family settled in the married quarter. The backyard of the married quarter opened up into a small swath of woodland, beginning with a line of banana trees popping out and taking up most of the space in the line of sight, with their leaves about 50 feet from the house. The front of the married quarter opened up onto the carpeted road leading straight to the railway station, and in the 60s, the area was not that densely populated, with houses placed around 50 meters apart, and during the night, when sun sets, people settle into their homes and had nothing much to do apart from having dinner and going to sleep. My granddad used to love having a smoke sitting at the porch in the backyard, and enjoyed the cool breeze flowing from the woodland every night before going to bed, and used to tuck my uncle in and go to sleep. My granddad did not entertain alcohol in his system, being a lifelong fitness enthusiast and a sportsman, but had the occasional drink or two with his buddies. As the family grew ever more comfortable with their stay in the married quarter, my granddad used to notice that a wild boar used to appear from behind the line of the banana leaves and look straight at the house, staying still for a few minutes. My granddad had not noticed any wild animal roaming around in the woods during the day, and even the railway department, to whom the married quarter belonged, had not informed my granddad about any potential wildlife that may be a threat to the family. The woods was supposed to be void of wildlife, and a single wild boar habitually appearing at night and just stare at the house was rather odd. But my granddad shrugged it off, thinking that maybe it was out there to pick on the bananas falling from the trees, and had not told anyone. The sighting of the wild boar became a routine appearance for my granddad, even showing it to my uncle and my grandmother as well. But what the wild boar did when it appeared from out the tree line deeply disturbed my grandmother, since what it did was nothing else but stare at the house. My granddad had even tried to chase it away by throwing rocks at it, but it seemed to be unfazed, and of course there are no firearms allowed in the country, so the option of shooting at the boar was out of the question. No matter what my granddad threw at the boar, exactly around the time of sunset, when everything becomes engulfed in the darkness of the night sky, the wild boar would not miss its cue to show up and stare at the house. A few weeks had gone past, and my granddad noticed a change in the routine of the wild boar. The wild boar would show up, retreat to the woods, and then the banana trees towards which the wild boar retreated would start shaking violently while everything else stayed still. My granddad would notice a dark silhouette of a tall and well-built human behind the banana trees. My granddad used to call out to the dark silhouette to ask if someone was there, and when pointing flashlights at the sight would reveal nothing. With the appearance of the silhouette, the entry of the wild boar stopped altogether, and during the holidays, my granddad cut out most of the banana trees and cleared the line of sight. But again, on the night my granddad described the encounter with the entity, my granddad had seen the dark silhouette standing right where the banana trees were and had gone after it alone. Because my granddad was late to come to bed, grandmother and my uncle had gone out to the back door porch and had witnessed my granddad punching and kicking the air as if he was fighting something unseen, shouting out loud, "You will not take them. It's either you or me." Afraid to the bone and unable to think of what to do next, My grandmother had run out to the railway station with my uncle to get the help of the security staff, and when my grandmother and uncle had returned with a night guard, my granddad was lying flat on his face with a mark of a black palm on his back, with his shirt torn as if he was mangled by a wild dog. My granddad was rushed to the nearby medical center, and when he awoke, he immediately asked for his son, my uncle, and had told him to never go to the backyard alone even during the day. My granddad, when recovered, handed over the married quarter immediately and left with the whole family. According to my granddad, he had encountered a demonic entity known in Sri Lanka as Mahasona, who was considered a renowned warrior during the age of great kings, who after his glory days got plunged into a life of sin and depravity, which got him killed by one of his fellow warriors, who slew Mahasona by decapitating his head and burning it. But due to the immense power and prestige, the warrior's name Bast, which had resurrected the fallen warrior by replacing the decapitated head with the head of a bear. The demon is infamous for riding a wild boar into battle with forces of the light and loves bathing in the blood of the innocent. The signature kill blow of the demon is the palm strike to the back of the head, which luckily my granddad had dodged, and it had hit him on his back. My granddad, who was furious when he saw the black silhouette standing near the place where the banana trees stood, had gone out to see for himself what the silhouette really was, and when he got close, the demonic entity had revealed himself to my granddad and demanded the blood of my uncle, who was a mere child at the time. My granddad had fought bravely against this demonic entity, denying the entity his son. My granddad had now passed away, but he got himself a tattoo of the demonic entity on his back, just as the fall tales describe the demon. That was how brave he was. I don't know if my bedtime stories helped you sleep or made you insomniac, but either way, that'll be it for tonight. I hope they pleased or terrified you. Good night, big children. Oh, and a little friendly advice: avoid staring too long into the darkness of your room. You never know what is hidden there. Kiss on your forehead.